you will watch on this podcast.
The medical industry has jumped on board to the low cholesterol thing. Let's focus on something that we can give somebody a pill for.
Is really something that very few people did, because some people do practice metabolic medicine, but they were not on the ground looking at all those people suffering silently. I call it myself the silent killer.
Welcome back to this Wellness Billion podcast, my friends. Today we have an amazing guest, and it's an amazing topic because we're going to talk about CGM. I'm going to let Karim introduce the guest.
Yeah, well, CGM, maybe our guest will tell us exactly what it is, but we're thrilled to have Dr. Kolo with us today. It's a physician with over 25 years of emergency medicine experience and a leading authority in continuous glucose monitoring. Here it is, I said it, CGM. He's not your average doctor. He's a true metabolic health guru, founding member of the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, and author of the Amazon bestseller, The Continuous Monitor Revolution for Non-Diabetics. Very interesting topics. Did I mention he has a whooping 60,000 followers on TikTok? And this guy is basically a rock star of metabolic health. Today, Dr. Kolo is here to drop knowledge on how to use CGMs and GLP-1 meds to level up the health and maybe even reverse disease like I did it. I had a diabetes type 2 doctor, and we'll talk about it.
Wow.
Plus, he'll show you how to use this tool with a low-carb diet. So without further ado, let's dive into some serious health hacks. Welcome, Dr. Kolo.
Thank you very much for having me. I've been looking very, very forward to joining you here.
It's our pleasure.
Our pleasure to have you in this podcast and to be able to share some valuable information.
So, Dr. Kolo, tell us about your journey. How did you come to do what you do?
So it's interesting. So as you mentioned, I'm a career emergency physician, and I've done that for 25 years. And in fact, I still work a handful of shifts in the emergency department here in the States. I'm in Ohio. At least once a month. So, and I kind of gravitated toward metabolic health because of that experience in the emergency department, seeing so much disease over so many years that is so unnecessary. And what gets all the headlines in the emergency department is the multiple traumas and the overdoses. But what we see day in and day out in emergency medicine is the vascular issues associated with metabolic health problems and obesity. So it is, the diabetes and the complications of diabetes like kidney failure and peripheral vascular disease and heart attacks and strokes, and the serious infections from having high blood sugar. And so after many years of seeing that, rather than being reactive in the emergency department to treating those problems after they exist, 7 years ago, I opened a metabolic health practice to help people prevent those problems. And the focus is not only helping people with weight, but helping people prevent and reverse metabolic disease. And of course, at the top of that list is prediabetes and diabetes.
It's so powerful. Having this experience on the ground and taking lessons out of it and doing something to prevent it is really something that very few people did, because some people do practice metabolic medicine, but they were not on the ground looking at all those people suffering silently. I call it myself the silent killer, which is called the metabolic syndrome, because you don't see it.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's really amazing, Doctor. Congratulations for that, and thank you. Thank you for doing what you do.
You know how people in this field are so passionate about it now. There's a group of metabolic health practitioners and of course non-clinicians, and we're becoming so passionate about this. And I think a lot of that passion comes from the realization that, at least here in the States, and I'm interested in your thoughts, but we have been led down the wrong path in terms of what leads leads to disease. And this is going back to when I was a kid in the 60s and early 70s, when we were told that cholesterol was public enemy number one, and you had to avoid fat. And of course, you could eat as many carbs as you want, because carbs aren't the problem. Fat and cholesterol are the problem. And of course, that was a falsehood. And so, in the U.S., we've been led by federal agencies and the food processing industry and the medical establishment itself to, basically avoid fat. And it has produced the epidemics of diabetes and obesity that we see now. So really, when I think we talk about metabolic health to a great degree, we're talking about just going back to eating and focusing on our health the way we have for generations, even back to our ancestors, and not going down this path of being so fanatical about lowering your fat intake that you end up being diabetic and obese.
Yeah, and even 2 weeks ago, I will send you an article, Dr. Paul. I also read that metabolic diseases can lead to cancer. Well, you know that sugar is the main feeder of cancer, but the metabolic diseases environment allows cancer to grow. And this I didn't know.
Yeah.
So that
No,
means
there's
it.
been,
Yeah.
there's been, I'm not, an expert in this area, but number one, it's common knowledge that obesity leads to increased cancer rates,
Definitely.
pancreatic cancer, esophageal cancer, ovarian cancer. That's common. But the new information, as you've just alluded to, is that high blood sugar feeds cancers. Cancers have, a very high metabolic rate, and their preferred form of energy is sugar. So there, in fact, it's interesting you brought this up. I actually reviewed an article just in the last week regarding patients with a type of brain cancer called glioblastoma. And the study was a certain group of those patients were put on a ketogenic diet, and another group were the control group without any controlled diet. And the rate of growth of the malignancy in the patients on the ketogenic diet was vastly reduced. Their progression of their disease was vastly reduced in comparison to those on a normal diet. So absolutely, this high blood sugar thing touches many, many areas of our health.
I'm without voice. Voiceless.
Yeah,
Really.
I mean, it's something that people don't talk about. That's the problem. It's that it's something that you see in the back end of the word that's spread out, and that's where it comes, where like the big marketing companies and big campaigns hide this type of information that then people realize, and it's maybe too late.
Yeah, and I think that's been the case in the United States for the last 50 years. And it started with the food pyramid and the US Department of Agriculture recommendations related to, making carbs the foundation of your diet. And then it progressed when the food processors jumped on board, because what foods have the longest shelf life, easiest produced, and the biggest profit margin? It's the processed foods, of course, which basically equals high sugar refined grains and seed oils. And so we've been led down this path, and then the medical industry has jumped on board to the low cholesterol thing. Let's focus on something that we can give somebody a pill for, as opposed to prevention. And in fact, a lot of times here we're waiting, clinicians in the United States, and I got a lot of friends that are primary care docs, so I'm not bad mouthing primary care docs, but unfortunately they're so busy in their offices that a lot of this approach is, let's just wait and see until you have disease and then we'll treat it rather than prevent it. Your A1C is borderline, your fasting blood sugar is borderline. Let's just wait and see what happens. Let's kick the can down the road a little while, and then, oh yeah, okay, now you're high enough, we'll start some metformin or other medication. Whereas, the reason for my medical practice really is an alternative to that, where I have the time. I've created a model where I can sit and talk to people, and we talk about, and we'll get get into this, what I believe is the foundation of good metabolic health, which is, low carb. Doesn't necessarily have to be keto. Some of my patients want to go keto, and that's fine, but low carb, I'm talking about 50 grams of carbs rather than the 350 grams of carbs in the standard American diet. Some intermittent fasting, and I'm not talking about going crazy with intermittent fasting. You don't have to fast for 3 days. Let's talk about getting you to 14 or 16 hours overnight. And then if you want to go a little bit longer, we can talk about. And then the third component is strength training, because as you know, strength training reduces insulin resistance. You get a little bit bigger muscle mass and you're soaking up more insulin and more blood sugar, and you're reducing that insulin resistance, and you're decreasing your risk of metabolic diseases like prediabetes and diabetes. And it's not that I don't believe in cardiovascular fitness. I do believe in cardiovascular fitness, but for the majority of people, especially for middle-aged metabolic syndrome or older people, women especially, because the risk of osteoporosis as you get older relates to the amount of muscle mass you have, and you can help prevent osteoporosis. But if you take that approach with, strength training as an emphasis in your workouts, that really is kind of the three legs of the stool: intermittent fasting, low carb, and strength training to help reverse and prevent metabolic disease.
Yes, thanks, Paul, for this, I would say, summary of how to approach it. But you see, we had several weeks ago, we had a guest who was talking, who was comparing, we were comparing during the conversation super natural food with processed foods. And she said, it's not that processed food is cheaper, because we thought it was cheaper. And she said, no, it's not cheaper, just more convenient. But natural food could be considered as a complete alternative to processed food
Definitely.
if you learn how to use it, learn how to buy it, learn how to preserve it. I mean, you can have superfood if you want to concentrate on having superfood.
Yeah.
If you don't think about having food or not having food or whatever food you want to eat, that's another story. So let me ask you this, doctor. After decades of emergency medicine, at what moment or what patient story made you pivot to strongly go into preventive care using CGMs for non-diabetic individuals?
So it's interesting how patients, patients think that they learn something from visiting their doctor, but I learn stuff from my patients all the time. And my moment was when I was beginning to get interested in metabolic health and understand the value of stabilizing blood sugar. And I work in a facility where we have an electronic medical record, so you can actually go through the patient's history before you go see the patient. And I was seeing a middle-aged gentleman, and he had come in for some unrelated issue. I think, even just like a knee injury or something like that. And I go to see him, and we always review, what's your past medical history? What are your medications? And I had gone through his record, and he was diabetic. He had A1Cs up in the 10, 11 range at one point. And I'm talking to him, and because, you look at a knee, and it's like one of the things you got to make sure is that it's not an infection in the knee, which high blood glucose can relate to, because that can be a devastating problem, a joint infection. That wasn't the case with him. It was just an injury to his knee. But I'm going through the record, and I said, oh, and I see that you're diabetic and you're on insulin. And this was his response to me. He said, yeah, I used to be. I said, what do you mean, used to be diabetic? It sounds like you've had this experience as well personally. I mean, the thinking that this was, 8, 9 years ago, the thinking in general is that's not reversible. You can't reverse that. What do you mean you used to be diabetic? And then he told me of his journey, him educating himself, his low carb approach, his focus on the things we just talked about. And his A1C now was in like the 5.3 range. He was completely off medicines. And that's really what actually probably ultimately spurred me to open my metabolic health practice, that these are reversible, preventable, and reversible conditions. And so it's that one, patient that basically I learned, a treasure load full of information from.
It sounds exactly like what my dad Karim did. He reversed his diabetes. He was pre-diabetic and he changed completely his diet. And today, myself, he impresses me.
Yeah. I mean that it is impressive, and not everybody can do that. I tell my patients when they come into me, if you're diabetic, we'll work on getting you off medications. If you're pre-diabetic, we'll prevent you from going on to diabetes. So there is a path for success there. And I'm going to bring up a topic you may find a little bit controversial, and it depends upon different clinicians how aggressive they are in their terminology and wording. Pre-diabetes, from my standpoint, is completely reversible. You can be cured of pre-diabetes. The issue with using that term for diabetes, I'm quite honestly a little bit hesitant. So, and again, I'm interested, Kareem, in what your thoughts are. I tell my patients when we get them off medications or we get their numbers into the normal range, if they were formerly diabetic, the term I have a tendency to use is put in remission. Your diabetes has been put in remission, because I am concerned that there's still a little bit of insulin resistance there, and that problem may have a risk of raising its ugly head as they get older. But those are kind of the terms I use: reversibility for prediabetes and remission for diabetes. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you about my experience. In fact, I was diabetes type 2. I had a pituitary tumor about 35 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Then I was eating what I thought was in a clean way, and I got diabetes type 2 and hypertension, to the extent that I was in an average of, let's say, 140, something like that.
Yeah.
So I had to do something about it, and then I did exactly what you mentioned, because I went on surveys. I'm a scientist, so I went on studying. I put my guys on it. We worked a lot to find out how. And I totally agree with you, Paul, because you're in remission, but you're never in total non-diabetic. I know I'm a pre-diabetic today, which says that I'm or 120 on my 120s 100, but my something in my, like you mentioned, my insulin resistance is already not functioning well, or not as well as it should. And so I have to be very careful monitoring my glucose on a continuous basis. And if I went on the quest on with my scientist working on this CGM, a non-invasive CGM, it's mainly because of that. I said to myself, it's so heavy to go and check your blood or to have a glucose monitor all the time. That is, it's not a life anymore. It's really difficult. And then I found out that the reason of my glucose spike are different. They might be during my sleep. They might be for whatever reason. They might be during or just after doing my sports. Sometimes I have a rise in glucose.
Yeah.
So it allows me to check my body and listen and learn to listen to him, because I can check and verify what I'm doing. And over time, I learn.
Absolutely.
As a patient, how to use my glucose monitor wisely for the sake of my health. And this is what I believe is necessary to do. And I believe your patients do it. They're in remission, but they should also beware of having a way to know their body better, whatever they do.
Absolutely. That's a great story. And, you have to continue to be diligent. If you went back to eating the way you ate at one time, then the diabetes would return. So I think I think we're on the same page there in terms of this really quite honestly, it's a lifestyle change.
Exactly.
And we work with my diets. I have a lot of patients that come to me initially because they want to lose weight. And of course, we put a CGM on for a couple of weeks, and it's like they realize their issues are much bigger than just needing to lose a few pounds. And I think, again, this can be a very instructive process for people. So can I tell you a little bit about how when people initially come to me, how we use the CGMs? Would
Sure,
that
that
be
would be
okay?
wonderful to
All
hear.
right. So as you mentioned, CGMs are expanding beyond diabetes into preventative and performance use. But when I have patients come to me initially, I, get them a CGM. They're over the counter in the States now, just in the last couple months, as you're probably aware.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I get them a CGM, but I tell them not to change their diet for the first week or 10 days. I don't, a lot of people come to me, they're passionate about making changes, but I said, hold on here. Let's just put the CGM on and let's see where you live in terms of what's going on with your blood glucose averages, what's going on with your spikes. So I asked them to do that for a week or 10 days. We'll have many months to be making changes down the road. And the reason I do that is because graphically seeing those spikes for the first time for patients that have some insulin resistance, it can be life changing. And in fact, the last chapter in my book is CGMs Change Lives. People can look at that data and forever they will never look at a pizza or a donut or a sandwich on a bun the same way, because they now know to some extent maybe they've been ruined in terms of consuming those foods, and that in a good way. But now they know, and they can have a primary care doctor that may have been looking out for their best interests for years. You need to lose a little bit of weight. You need to take this approach. But once they see those changes, it's imprinted in their mind, and they able to gravitate toward a low carb approach. And of course, I'm, as you are, I think, big advocates of this. Calorie for weight loss and even diabetes management, calorie restriction, I don't think is sustainable for a lifetime. But low carb or keto, and most of my patients are low carb, that is sustainable for a lifetime, because there's really an evolution, a change, a maturation that takes place in your brain where you just don't even think about foods to some extent that you thought about previously. So again, I think that first 2 week period is pretty instructive for people, because that is the foundation of them making sustainable change.
I saw you looking at me in a weird way, because we always have this debate between us, which is like calories and diets. But bear in mind, Karim, he said something very, very important, which is in lifetime. He said about low calorie in a lifetime, this is not sustainable, and I totally agree. Like being on a deficit in a lifetime is not sustainable at all, and it's not good as well for your body, because at some point it just adapts, and you keep on eating less and less and less and less, and you have less energy, which is not good. And I totally agree with you, Dr. Paul, which is like you talked about a lifestyle. You talked about changing your whole lifestyle. People need to understand that nutrition is the essence of everything. If you find ways to be able to have a clean nutrition, like the keto nutrition, and eat whatever you want, but in a keto way, you want everything, which is actually possible, because I see my dad eating like amazing meals and cakes and treating himself all in a keto way. And it's a healthy way, because whenever you eat it, then you feel good, and you don't have how do you say, the consequences, like bad consequences after eating that. I'm a strong believer of this as well. So this is my answer, Kareem.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. We invented the kind of keto pizza. We invented kind of keto cakes, which has a
I
very low
agree.
sugar spike, and we verify through the glucose monitor that it works well, and it works. Dr. Paul, we are seeing CGM adoption in elite athletes and wellness enthusiasts, because like. Do you believe CGMs are more effective as performance enhancers or preventive tools? Is the future in combining, let's say, both of them?
Yeah, so my focus primarily is in I have a select group of patients that come to me that are generally overweight with metabolic issues. Though I do realize that the CGMs are being used in a performance arena as well, for athletes, or even just what you might term gym rats. People that really want to optimize their performance. In fact, I was fortunate to meet a lady a couple weeks ago that I did a podcast with, who focuses on endurance sports and coaching individuals to perform in a ketotic state, because she has analyzed, and I don't know the specifics of it, but basically that sustainable for endurance sports, sustainable athletic performance can be enhanced in a ketogenic state. So I'm not an expert in that area, and I know, but I know that there is a whole segment of population, high performance athletes, triathlon, people, mountain bike, endurance performance, which is what this lady is into. That can be very, very helpful. But I'll tell you, here in the States, in my practice, there's so much metabolic syndrome that keeps me busy, and I actually have not gravitated into the performance area much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some critics argue that CGMs might lead to data-induced anxiety or obsessive behaviors in the healthy users. Do you coach your patients to develop a balanced and empowering relationship with their glucose data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have researched this. I researched this for my book, and there was a look. This was actually initially in type ones, and to putting CGMs on kids, create psychological issues, that they become completely focused on this, and all the data says no. All the data says that these are great guides, to helping you with your diet, but not but don't produce anxiety. I tell my patients that you have to live your life as well. Related to intermittent fasting. If you're attending a wedding or a family dinner, or a special event, a breakfast on the weekend with your family, then yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and break your fast. You don't have to stay with that pattern.
Oh, yeah,
If
I think
you
we love
Yeah,
that.
I mean, just yeah, you gotta live your life, and the same thing with your carb intake. If there's a special occasion, then that's fine, but it can't be a daily pattern. So I have found with the CGMs that they are not detrimental in terms of causing people anxiety, or over concern. With my practice, the way we use the CGMs, we do that first 2 week period, which is instructive. Then we look at dietary modification. And then I have patients, and you have seen this too. You might be one, Karim. One is I have patients that get a CGM on their arm and they never want to be without a CGM again in their life. But I also have other patients that modify their dietary approach. They get into a pattern, and they don't need one continuously. It's just like when they're counting their macros. They may get so good at this that they wear a CGM in the first couple of months that I'm working with them continuously for 2 or 3 months, but then after that they maybe only need it for a 2 week period every 8 or 10 weeks or something like that. So I just have not seen it produce a lot of anxiety or problems, but I do think the approach can be individualized depending upon that patient's needs. If their averages are high and they're still spiking, then the need for the CGM, I think, is more persistent. If they bring things into a range where they're stable, then I don't think they need it continually.
Yeah, but then we'll come to another thing, doctor. The other thing is that you began by explaining that there are so many side effects of metabolic diseases, and it can come from so many places that I like the approach of a scientist that you probably know very well. His name is Benjamin Bickman.
Yeah, he's great.
He's just amazing. He's an amazing scientist for me. He's one of the best in science in metabolic health. And for him, it's all about the insulin hormone you have in your body.
Right.
And the real enemy is this level of insulin hormone that your pancreas produces when you have type 2 diabetes, not talking even for type 1. But he says it's the entry point of all sickness. And
Yes.
his book is Why We Get Sick. You might have read it.
Great book. Great book.
Fantastic book. Fantastic book. I always take him as an example because by saying, okay, we don't need a glucose monitor, okay, fair enough. But know that the level of insulin that your organism produces is a culprit of other diseases that you might have. And you have to be aware of that to be nudged enough by a continuous glucose monitor to be aware that even if it's not for the spikes, it's at least for the curve it produces for whatever you do, and that you can have something else that rises with this kind of spikes that you're having that you don't see, that over time can produce other effects which will be detrimental to you. What do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. Insulin is huge, and it is high insulin can be the foundation of much disease. All those diseases associated with metabolic syndrome. And first, I just got to comment on Dr. Bickman. I've had the privilege of being at a few conferences where he talks, and his work is amazing. And he's
Amazing.
a counterpoint to a lot of other research
Yeah.
that is going on that is meant to support different areas of industry, et cetera. So he is a pure scientist, and he just tells it like it is. Insulin is huge, and I want to touch on the fact that I always measure fasting insulin levels in patients when I see them initially. And then that is another parameter that we follow along for the reason that you just mentioned. Where your insulin level is can be an indication of your risk for multiple diseases. It's the blood sugar is almost like a secondary indication of where your insulin is. So I encourage people to get a fasting insulin level. You go to your doc here in the States, and it's like, we got to get a cholesterol level 3 times a year. But 95% of my patients have never had a fasting insulin level done, which for the majority of my patients is a much more important test. So I always get a fasting insulin level on people when they start, and then we usually follow it again 3 or 4 months later after they've done a change. And you're probably familiar with this calculation called a HOMA-IR.
Underscore. Yeah.
Yeah, the homeostatic model of insulin resistance. And I calculate those on every one of my patients. And just for your listeners, if you've got insulin, actually, I'm going to digress here for just a second, Don. I'm going to try and simplify it, and I hope I'm not being too basic for your listeners. But basically, the story is when you eat a carb, your blood sugar goes up. Your pancreas releases insulin, and that forces that blood glucose into your organs. And when you think of organs, think of muscles. And of course, that then helps bring your blood glucose down. But what happens if your sugar is too high for too long a period of time, typical of a processed food diet? Then that pancreas keeps pumping out that insulin, but the organs start resisting it. They've got enough blood sugar that they've taken in. There's plenty of blood sugar now still in the bloodstream, and so those organs start resisting insulin. So that's how I like people to think of insulin resistance. It's like, insulin, the muscles are saying, insulin, we aren't going to listen to you anymore. We're resisting your signal because we've got plenty of energy. And then, of course, one thing that happens with that excess blood sugar, it goes to the liver and gets converted to fat and gets deposited around the middle and causes fatty liver disease. So when we do these things that we're just talking about, intermittent fasting, low carb strength training, it reverses that resistance process. So, calculating or looking at a HOMA-IR in patients can be very instructive, because basically, if your insulin level is a little high, if you have insulin resistance, that should be pushing your blood sugar down, because the function of insulin is to push that blood glucose into your organs. But if the organs are resisting that, then the insulin keeps going up, but the blood sugar doesn't go down. So you plug those two numbers, simultaneous fasting blood glucose and insulin level, into the HOMA-IR formula, and it gives you an exact level of insulin resistance, which is a great thing to hang your hat on. And I've had patients that have come in with very high HOMA-IRs, level of insulin resistance, and over time with these dietary modifications, we bring that way down. So one suggestion to your listeners is, ask your doctor about getting a fasting insulin level. At least in the States, their jaw will drop and they'll say, "What are you talking about?" For the majority of providers.
Yeah,
So again, for anybody that's got insulin resistance, risk factors for metabolic syndrome, overweight, family history of diabetes, knowing your level of insulin resistance, calculating the home IR, and asking your doctor for a fasting insulin level, I think is absolutely critical.
when I listen to you, doctor, when it comes to my mind? What comes to my mind is like a drug addiction. I mean, this insulin is like a drug addiction. I mean, your body embeds it and he needs even more and more and more and more every time for the same result,
Yes.
which is getting the glucose into your cell. And this is a kind of addiction that people have over time, and sometimes it's in the very young age. You were speaking about those young guys. I was with one of the biggest metabolic health doctor handling the biggest hospital of Casablanca. We had 2 hours talk. I'm participating to her foundation, helping her, and so on and so forth, because I believe they need help. When she took me back into the front door, she was nearly crying. I said, "Doctor, we were talking for 2 hours and you're shooting those. Why are you crying?" She said, "Because I believe that in the 10 years to come, nearly 90% of the kids of this country will be pre-diabetic or diabetic because of the culture of eating too much sugar, handling too much transformed food and over-transformed food that their parents find practical or good for them, or give them as a compensation
Yeah.
for what they might do or not do." I was struck, and when you spoke about this insulin spike and the effect it has in the body in such a clear way, it reminded me of being like under the drug
Yeah.
addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a parallel there. And of course, there's no question that highly processed foods, with, this very palatable approach of refined grains and sugars and seed oils and emulsifiers to make the texture perfect, it's consistent with that because those foods cause a release of dopamine in your brain as well. So you become hooked on those. So there's no question that it's an addiction. All the forces, those parents, because I've had them in my office, they have to super educate themselves regarding what is the right path to lead their kids down because they're told frosted Cheerios are heart healthy. Frosted Cheerios have just a little bit of dissolvable fiber, psyllium in it. Not anything that's going to make any significant difference in their cholesterol levels. Might give you, it might be 35 or 40 grams of either complex carbs and or sugar in a single bowl, but we're told that they're heart healthy.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, these parents are led down the wrong path with their kids and for themselves that these are healthy foods when they aren't. And the only thing we can do as clinicians and spokespeople is this type of format where we get the word out to people to begin to question what they have been told for many, many years. I think you do that. I do it in a one-on-one basis. You do it here globally, really, with getting the word out. But if we can help people educate themselves, it's going to be a great thing, and it's the only way we're going to reverse that process and help save some of those kids that you just spoke of.
I mean, nowadays the information is much more available than before. So I feel like even parents are getting more conscious about the situation and more conscious about what they're giving to their kids. And I feel like the more we go towards the generations, the more people will understand, and the less people will start consuming sugar because they know that, like you both said, sugar is the enemy. Sugar is a drug, and it's kind of a legal drug that shouldn't be illegal.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree completely.
When you enter a supermarket or a candy store, it really strikes me because as you are a doctor, metabolic doctor for so many years, and Yassine and I went into skiing, and one day we entered into a candy store, a real candy, nice, very fancy
Yeah.
candy stores with
Yeah.
But it was fancy. And I said to him, listen, I said, you see all this? This is only drug. And when you enter the supermarket, by the way, if you notice that, all the LAs from the supermarket in the beginning are all about biscuits, all about these super transformed food, all about chocolate and candies and whatever you want to call it. And at the end, you have the vegetables and the greens and the proteins or whatever meat you want to call it. But in the beginning, when you enter, you have it in front of you. So even marketingly speaking, there's a relation between what people offer to you, not only the producers of the food, but the sellers of the food. And you might have known, maybe you're surely aware of this last meeting about 2-3 days ago with Mr. Kennedy bringing up those food companies and asking them to take out most of the additives that they have. And I think this period on, particularly in the US, and I hope it will spread all over the world, because US is a good example of what's bad about food, and it can be a good example of what's good about food. And they all agreed, kind of between brackets, that they had to revise the way they produce their food for the sake of the kids. So
Yeah.
the entry doors, if you remember well correctly, Paul, the entry door for him, we said, let's work on having our kids have a better food at school.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement, I think in the U.S. is a good thing. There is always this balance between, freedoms and choice and really what's in the interest of individuals. But I do think we've allowed things to go way overboard in terms of processed foods and the way processed foods are purchased or pushed, I should say. In the U.S., it's now 70% of food is processed food. And in that arena, I actually try and keep things super simple for my patients, and that's because that's the way I can frame it for myself and remember it. And so, parents can be overwhelmed with different information and points of view coming at them. But from a processed food standpoint, and I think this is some degree what Mr. Kennedy is beginning to do, is saying, let's just educate ourselves about those agreements. And he's getting a lot of influencers on board to help get the word out on this. But the simple approach, and I don't know if you two agree with this, but I'm going to tell you what I tell my patients to keep things very simple is first of all, the most simple thing is look at the number of ingredients on the label. If it's got a lot of ingredients, avoid it. You can go to the meat department. A steak doesn't have, or chicken doesn't have listed ingredients on it. You can go to the produce department and broccoli or a squash doesn't have ingredients on it. But you go to those middle aisles that you mentioned, and the list of ingredients could be 40 or 50 words long. So the first thing is just look for things that have limited ingredients. But then in terms of processed food, what I tell my patients is let's keep things real simple, which is avoid refined grains. Okay, basically it says it on the label, refined wheat, avoid sugar, okay, and then avoid seed oils. And I am a believer that seed oils are inflammatory, and should largely be avoided. I realize that's a little bit more controversial now. I think everybody knows that avocado oil and walnut oil and olive oil are a better approach for cooking. But basically, I tell my patients to limit your seed oils. There's a list of those. You can find it easy: soybeans, corn, safflower. Limit your seed oils, limit your refined grains, and limit your sugar. And then related to the fast food that's out there, basically it's limit your carbs, take the top off the bun, or get rid of the whole bun if you choose to. And then I would also encourage you to avoid foods that are cooked in seed oil. So your standard chicken, it's got, this much breading on it, which is carbs, and, there's some sugar put in there as well. And then it's fried in seed oils. But when you're out and around for fast food, avoid fried fast food. And to a great degree, if you do those few things, you can cut your processed food intake, to a very low degree.
My take on that is that I broadly see a new wellness economy where everyone from executive to students to little kids have access to kind of CGM guided lifestyle like we're having it in our Oura Ring or Apple Watch or whatever. It should be part of it. This is what we're working on. And I believe it'll be of an interest of humanity to have such a monitor embedded and as cheaply as possible for people to be able to handle their health, because sugar is one of the entry points, as well as stress, as well as the controlling how your heartbeats functions, and that's what we're working on. And we also have real health mentors like yourself, or metabolic, like that are more metabolic trainers to talk to. Having one in your pocket and one to talk to are two pillars that you could have, because you need to talk to an expert professional, and so on and so forth. And I think it's the future should be. This is the future we're trying to build in our company. It's called Epi, by the way, because of epigenetics, because it transforms you on a daily basis, and it transforms this ellipse you have in your original code that opens and by opening and closing protein doors. But just like heart rate or sleep tracking, glucose monitoring becomes a daily baseline, should become a baseline metric. And it could be like even more integrated into the mainstream wearables, influencing everything from personalized nutrition to mental clarity to sports to whatever. Because it's a part of, this is my belief, that it's part of our life. We eat 3 times a day. We sometimes practice sports, sometimes not. We stress like everybody. We should have a relation between the stress and the glucose spikes that we have.
Right.
So it's a kind of, if it would be affordable, the fact that it was sold over the counter, Paul, is a wonderful thing,
Absolutely. Great.
because it becomes available to everyone. It's a highly priced. It's still, price is not that affordable for everyone, but I think it will become, and it should become, and we should all work on it, you and us, to make it affordable so that you can have it at your fingertips.
That's a great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too. And they are expensive. I mean, a CGM in the States is $50, and I understand that can be tough for people. But I also think that if you compare that with the potential benefit, economic and otherwise, to have a CGM on for a couple weeks, again, can be life changing. So I do think there's a good benefit for that cost. And I do think that when we're able to move toward the goal that it sounds like you have, of a non-invasive approach, when people can wear a watch or a ring, or even a patch that is non-invasive, to provide 24/7 blood glucose, it's just going to take us to a whole nother level, and it will raise awareness tremendously. And I understand there's cost issues, and in the United States, for people that would really benefit from one, getting some type of insurance or support coverage for it, or support, is a big deal. But the way that can impact, quite honestly, the health of humanity is just tremendous. So it sounds like you're on a mission, really, that can change millions, even billions of people's lives potentially, with against the largest threat that we now have in the Western world, and I think in the East as well, which is high blood sugar and metabolic syndrome. And if you can make it convenient for people to know what's going on with their physiology, their blood sugar 24/7, indirectly, and some insight into their insulin level 24/7, then it's going to have a tremendous impact. So I applaud you for pursuing this mission of basically getting this technology into the hands of as many people as possible.
Thank you, Paul. It comes directly to our heart. Yassine and I work on it on a daily basis. Well, Yassine, with his 2.7 million followers, has a lot to do on the side, but he's also contributing to it. And I think what you just said is very, very powerful, and it lifts up the wish that we have to continue the mission. And you're on a mission, Doctor, and we're all on a mission in our field, and we are in a scientific field. You are in a more biological practitioner field. Yassine is on a communication field, and believe it or not, what you just said is so powerful that I wished everyone in the world, every scientist in the world could listen to what you say, because it means so much for so many people. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Again, we just keep chipping away, and we're going to make progress. And for me, a lot of times in my office, it's one patient at a time. Doing podcasts like this, trying to get the word out to a larger group of people. For you, you're working on a venture that again could change potentially billions of people's lives. So, I think we all just keep, rolling up our sleeves, get up every morning with passion, and work in this direction. And it's a continuous quality improvement approach, because we're never going to get to complete success, but we're certainly going to continue to head in the right direction and change people's lives.
Exactly. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time. This conversation was full of information, and we really appreciate it, and we really hope our audience appreciate as well the amazing conversation we had. Please, where can we find you?
So thanks for asking. The name, I'm going to give you a few different websites, and I'm sure you'll post these. But the name of my medical practice is Metabolic MDs, metabolicmds plural.com. And then with over-the-counter CGMs becoming available in the United States, I've opened another website, which is CGM-doctor.com, and people can go there for all kinds of information related to CGM use, and also to purchase an over-the-counter CGM. And I also have health coaches, though I'm licensed in a limited number of states. I have health coaches that can provide guidance to CGM use and what's going on with your curves, et cetera, all over the country. And then the book on Amazon, which is the best-selling book on CGMs on Amazon. If you would just Google my last name, Kolodzik on Amazon book, or just look for the CGM Revolution on Amazon, then you'll be able to find the book. And it's really kind of a nuts to bolts, to give you a quick summary, nuts to bolts, why we have this problem, how I approach my patients initially, what the long-term goals are, and it's all wrapped around using CGMs. Really is an instructive tool to help, and behavioral tool to help change people's lives.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll put everything down below in the description so the audience can access it easily.
Yeah, I really appreciate. Yeah, go ahead.
It was an amazing time spent with you for such a profound topic, and I want to thank you to the in the name of the audience, to have given us so much subtle as well as very straightforward advices for people to be able to be aware of this silent killer that we call it, you as a practitioner and us as a scientist, and Yassine as a communicator. But it was really an outstanding moment we spent with you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to join you, and together let's change some lives here. Okay.
Definitely. Guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification button so you don't miss the next one.